I think photography is not about creating beautiful shots. It's about creating a film that sustains the feel all the way through without losing the audience. Yeah, I mean, that's the trick. And I think if somebody says, "Oh, well, that was a really great movie," that's what I want to hear. Not, "Oh, wasn't that a brilliant shot?" or "Wasn't that brilliant?" A brilliant camera move or brilliant photography. Because then I think really it's taking the audience out of the film. They've not really seen the film as a whole piece.
Yeah, I mean, it's also like when somebody says, "Oh, I love that shot," and I go, "Oh dear, that's wrong then, isn't it?" You shouldn't love a shot. Not first off, but it should all be part of a whole. That's my feeling,
So simpler,
I think, is usually better, yeah. Especially if you haven't got a big budget.
That's true.
In a way, that's my failure, because you shouldn't really. Nothing should specifically stand out. You're trying to put the audience in a world that they're immersed in, and everything should flow as a piece.
I think people confuse pretty with good cinematography. What was it Freddie Francis says? There was good cinematography and bad cinematography, and then there's the cinematography that's right for the movie. And I often feel that actually if reviewers don't mention your work, it's probably better than if they do. It means it actually works because the film is a piece and you don't. I've never really been big on technology. Technique, I mean, maybe technique, but not technology. You know what I mean? I don't know much about the workings of a camera. I know about, RGB lab work and stuff, but I don't know much about pixels, where they come from and how they exist. And, I enjoy reading about it, but it goes straight through. I love images and telling stories with images and how you move the camera and framing. What difference does you move the camera that way, that little bit? What difference does that make to the effect it has on an audience? A light's here, or it's a light here, or it's a here, or it's a here, or it's back here. What do those differences? How do they affect the scene and the audience's perception of the story and their immersion in that story? That's what's interesting. Not whether it's 8mm, 70mm, Alexa, red camera, iPhone. I don't really care, It's part of it, but it's not the essential part of it.
See, I'm very much of the mind, sometimes you can have too much stuff. You can have too much technology and too much, surrounded by so much crap, you never actually get the film made. I really think that happens a lot, I don't like to flash, I don't like to use a lot of filters. I just like life to be the way I see it, without a sort of veneer.
Your documentary.
It goes back to what I really wanted to do when I first started I love seeing things and picturing things. I love the way reality is, and I just want to sort of take reality and record it, really, rather than play around with it. What you do, you make the best of it, which I think I draw on my documentary experience to make it work. Because I know actually you can make a film without any lights, without anybody, just with a camera. If you had to, you just have to be careful, choose your light and choose your moment and choose the angle.
In a sense that, you don't want to have big ostentatious camera moves and stuff. It's much more what's happening within the frame. It's a more subtle thing than that, really, I think, anyway. But whether that comes out in the result, I don't know. But that's where I kind of come from, in a way.
Sure.
I think there's times to move the camera, there's times to follow a character, and there's times to stay back and allow that character to the audience to observe that character within the space. You know what I mean?
100%.
You don't always want to be wandering around with a steady cam. Sometimes it's actually a distraction. Sometimes it would be stronger. Just keep this camera static on a wide shot. Sometimes it'd be better the actor sat down and you just looked at his face instead of he's wandering around all these wonderful locations. That's the balance, that's the trick.
My philosophy of cinematography, and when sometimes I see cameras doing these amazingly elaborate things, I think, well, why? And I go back to Antonioni or Jean-Pierre Melville, when the camera moves, there's a really deliberate point to what it's trying to say to the audience by making that move or creating that composition. And I think we tend to forget how powerful imagery can be in that way, you know, how it can be used to bring more to the table than, you know, there's some of the parts, you know.
I've said this a million times to people when I was shooting, you know, rock and roll or rock videos and stuff. If the band was no good, you would move the camera as much as possible. But I was filming Muddy Waters once and I didn't want to move, you know, or BB King or something. You don't move the camera because why do you need to? Because that performance is so magnetic. You just want to look at that face and the guy. So I think that's, you know, that's a silly anecdote, but I think it does play to, you know, if you're shooting a great performance, you don't want to move the camera in a way that's going to distract the audience from being in that character's mind, you know, with that character, do you? You know, so simplicity is the best way to go, really. I don't think I have a style. I've discovered ways of lighting that sort of work for me, you know. Like I look at this lighting, it's great, but I wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? I'd do it a different way, but that's all personal. But that's not really a style. I don't think I have a naturalistic style. I hope I have a style that suits the project that I'm on. I mean, I walk on a film set on a new movie and I think it feels like I've never done it before, like I'm learning, you know? So I don't think I've got a style. Any way a film looks is a product of the prep on that film and how that sort of developed as we've gone along. It's also not necessarily about creating total realism.
Yes.
I think there's a difference between, in a way, naturalism and realism. I mean, you go out on a moonlit night, that's not what you imagine it looks like. If you really study it, that's not what the audience necessarily expects to see in a film. Or that's not necessarily what you actually want to show them because you want to concentrate on a certain aspect and you want to, you know, create a certain mood. So, and the thing is with lighting, you're not always trying to completely represent reality. In fact, often far from it. But for me anyway, I want to create a reality.
Yeah.
I want to put the audience in a world that they believe that appears like it behaves the way the real world does to their eyes. The light behaves the way it does in the real world. It's not something that suddenly that jumps out. There's suddenly two shadows from one sun, or you know, or there's multitude of color lights with no justification. I don't like that sort of world. I like to create a world that the audience can be immersed in and can believe it. But it's not necessarily the world that I see out here now. You know, that's the difference. And that's especially, I think, applies to night shooting. And it's very hard to recreate exactly what night looks like because your eyes behave so differently in low light levels. You know, so it's a very interesting issue, really. What is real and what is the way you want to create for the audience? What do you want to create for the audience? You know, I think it's a mistake in that sense to try and create something that's ultra realistic or ultra naturalistic to the world we actually see at night. I think you create your own version of it, really, how you interpret it. And like you were saying, I don't really like a frame where everything is kind of so dark. It might be realistic or naturalistic. It's muddy and dark, and that's what you would see if you were out there on a really black night with no moon and a cloudy night, sure. But do you want to show the audience that? I don't know, you know. So it's your interpretation of it. I like it to feel real, and I like feeling I like within the scene somewhere to see that practical, or see the window, to know the justification for the light in the space. One of my peeves is that so often you're taken out of a film because it's not that the lighting is too stylized or anything. It just doesn't feel real. I don't know where that light is coming from. I don't know why it's there, you know. You often see a wonderful blue backlight and you think, well, where's that coming from? It's not like it's wrong. It's just not justified. Lighting, I think all cinematography should kind of like just dissolve into the movie somehow. It shouldn't take you out. It shouldn't be something that stands out in any way, you know. The danger is that takes too much priority over the script and the director's wishes and the scene. You don't ever want to go on a location scout thinking first, primarily, where's the light coming from? That's death. You really want to be feeling, does this work for the feel of the scene? Can you imagine the actors in this space? Can you imagine the blocking? I mean, you might have had long discussions with the director prior to doing a location scout about, maybe specifically about scenes and how you imagine shooting them, like whether you're going to do a scene in a big wide shot and allow the characters to move within the space, or is it a more dynamic scene where you want to do a lot of cuts and maybe it's a lot of close-ups. So that you think about the space in those terms first.
I love what Connie Hall used to call happy accidents. You know, you're in a set and suddenly the light starts slashing through a window, and even if you don't use that natural light, you suddenly think, no, that's it, I didn't think of that. So you maybe cut that light off and put a lamp to do exactly the same thing so you can have consistency. Conrad Hall was great on this. He was great on this. He said, you know, sometimes he really wanted his films to look ugly, to capture something that we normally shy away from in making movies. You know, ugliness can have a certain beauty as well. It's a strange sort of dichotomy going on there, really.
You have to spend the time in prep. You have to think it out. You have to work it out technically. It becomes like you write a battle plan. I mean, the sequence I'm talking about in No Country, I spent, mornings and nights going down, looking at locations and figuring exactly what shot I wanted to do on what time of day. And then I fitted a whole chart of these shots as to when I wanted them shot, because some of them were done with a second unit and we were doing something else, and some of them were done at the beginning of a day and an end of a day. So there's a whole jigsaw puzzle. And you plan the angles. I mean, that whole thing was storyboarded, although, I mean, we changed things on the day, but you have a basic plan of action. Every day you're going to start, the sun comes up here, we're going to start with these shots. And at midday, we can do these in the car, and then as the sun goes down, we can shoot this way.
I mean, I don't think I've ever been on a film where you've had something in your head and the final product has been what you had in your head. That never happens. There's always something that comes in that, I won't say necessarily compromises it, but it sort of...
It challenges you.
It challenges you and it changes the final result. And that's probably a good thing because I don't think there's anything worse than going in with this sort of set idea of what it should be, and then it's just like you're doing it like painting by numbers, the old painting by numbers things that you used to do, that's not fun, but it's also, I don't think, creatively interesting.
I like to have thought things through in my head beforehand, but I also love spontaneity. I don't want to be tied down to something. I mean, obviously, on certain situations, often you have to put a rig up. You have to know
somewhat
basically what you're going to do. Otherwise, I mean, you just know where you're going to do some of these things on the day, obviously. But I do like on the day to feel that I'm open to what happens on the set. And I think a lot of people still look at lighting in this way, which was front light, key light, backlight, fill light, kicker light, but that's not really the essence of lighting. That's the way of creating an image that you have in your head. So it's the image that you have in your head that's more important than the technique, if that makes sense. So I think to really understand light and be able to light, you have to understand how it makes you feel. You could light it a million ways, but what do you want the audience to feel? That's the important thing. What's the script? What's the story? What's the scene? What's the individual shot you're shooting? And what do you want the audience to feel by what you do with the camera? That's what's important, not, key light, fill light, backlight, And I think we're all guilty of starting to light and think, that's nice. Oh, well, I put a little kicker on here, a little backlight. Oh, then I can put a little card here, it'll bounce something in the eye. Then I'll do this.
and you realize you've destroyed it. It's become some piece of confectionery instead of something that's really simple and direct. And that's what I'm going back to looking at people's stills photographs and what you like. And for me, the best stills photographs are kind of the ones that just strip away all the things that the photographer might see on the periphery of what is around them, and concentrate on that one little image that says more than you would if you showed it in a big wide shot with a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Well, I've got a very strong feeling about lenses, and personally, I'm sitting here talking to you, and you're filming me from over there on a shoulder and probably a single, where I'd rarely do that, because I think, the camera was to me, I would shoot singles inside here, unless it's for a particular effect, and then I'd drop back off and be more observational with a shoulder in. I mean, I think it's a totally different effect to an audience looking at somebody on the end of a 100mm lens, as opposed to somebody that's being shot on a 27 close to, or 21. I mean, it's just the same as your relationship in real life to somebody. I'm sitting this close to you. I'm not seeing you from over there on a long lens, So I don't think we take that into account as much as we should, really.
No, the thing about the lens choice, it's a sort of psychological thing, and again, like I say, it's the effect you want to create for the audience. How do you want the audience to feel? What's their perspective on the image you're showing them? And that's why, I don't like shooting multiple cameras most of the time. Obviously, you have to do it on certain stunt shots, or sometimes it's good to do two camera. We did quite a bit of two camera work on Dead Man Walking. But I think you have to consider why you're doing it and what that effect is, not just do it because it looks pretty. That's the problem. That's the problem with all cinematography. The danger with any cinematography, not with all cinematography, but the danger with any cinematography is that you get swept away by the prettiness of something, the attractiveness of something, the coolness of something. Oh, if we move the camera like this is really clever. Or this light looks great. But then, oh, this looks better on a longer lens because it's all out of focus, and then we can put something in the foreground. It looks really pretty. But is it right? Does it really help the story? It becomes for its own sake. That's the danger. I'm not saying everybody does it, but that's the danger. And I sometimes have to stop myself. Joel said, we're doing this script, No Country for Old Men. I just read the book. I said, well, aren't you going to direct it? And they said, well, we might. I said, I'll never talk to you again if you don't direct it. 1917.
Blake, let's talk about this for a minute. Why?
I don't think you should move the camera unless you've got a very important reason for doing so. 1917, it was really useful because you're telling a story in a very particular way, and it's a real-time story, and you're following basically one character. It worked. It immersed the audience in this story. We had to design basically the shot in our heads and on a diagram before the set could be built, before the trenches could be dug, because everything had to be built to the actual action, the time the action would take, the time that the dialogue would take with two guys walking at a certain speed. And we went to Harry and said, we were going to do this film, so I'd really like to shoot it on the LF, but I can't do it on the studio LF. It's not as heavy as a 535 maybe, film camera, but it's still kind of too heavy to run on a lightweight gimbal. So we said to Harry, well, if you can't do it, there are some other cameras that we could use. And Harry said, well, oh my, well, we thought about making one, but not for a few years. And I said, well, it's next year. They said, okay, we promise you we can get you 2 prototypes. It was a trick that I'd done on Jarhead, actually leaving a set of lights in shot and then just replacing those lights with a fire element. The night scenes under the oil fires, we basically shot them on stage at Universal. We had the 2 big stages with a door open in the middle and basically filled it with kind of sand dunes. And I lit that entirely with household bulbs. You get them at Home Depot. And I had them on, chasing dimmers, and so they gave a sort of flicker. So when we came to do 1917 and the burning church, I thought, well, okay, I need to light 360, but this time I need to light a huge space because Schofield's journey is enormous, really, running. That's quite a long sort of old trip. And there were very specific places where the light needed to be. So I figured to make the biggest pile of lights I've ever done. I could just sort of balance each light in this huge rig and, punch it out a little bit where I needed a bit more of a hot spot or soften it all down. It was really very controlled. Prisoners.
Tell me, goddammit. Tell me where they are. Tell me! Tell me! Tell me!
That was the first film I did with Denis, and I think some of it we storyboarded, but I know Denis and I spent quite a while talking through the script, talking about concepts and ideas and just the feel of the thing, which that sort of period I think is invaluable, and I love it. Denis calls it the one time you can dream, because as soon as you get to the production, then reality hits and everything's compromised. I mean, whatever you think of anything you've ever done, you look at it and you know it's a compromise. The trick was to get the rain and to get the rig on the car and to get the town where they're driving through the town and get the number of vehicles, not only stunt vehicles, but actually just local people to turn up with their cars. That was a big effort. That was the last day of shooting, in fact. And it took to the end of the shoot for us, well, I say us, for Denis and I, really to get production to sign off on it, on that number of cars and control that street. Luckily, it was a small town street and it wasn't going to be very busy late at night. I couldn't light it. There's no way you could put lights in it. So I needed the street lights to work, the shops to be lit, to leave the lights on in certain times. And so there's all those things you have to work out. We were both very glad at the end we actually managed to do it, because there was some doubt about it for a while.
We interviewed Paul Dano a few months ago, and he was really gushing about the energy that Team Deakins had, that there was this quiet professionalism.
We worked very much with the same core people, My first assistant, Andy Harris, I worked with since doing Fargo on every movie. Every movie. Mitch Lillian, the key grip, Billy O'Leary, the gaffer I've worked with many, many times since Sid and Nancy. They all know the kind of set I like, which is quiet. And I'm always behind the camera. They know that they have more responsibility because I am at the camera, so they have to be attentive to things that might change rather than having me go and try and find where they are to get something else done. So it's a very, very tight group of people. It's nice to hear somebody like Paul Dano say that. I think one of the cinematographer's main responsibilities is to create a set that it's inviting. It's a safe place for an actor to do what they have to do, because if you didn't have the performance, you wouldn't have anything in most films. You owe it to them, really, and I think that's really important. I'm kind of a nervous person, especially on a movie set. But as nervous as I am, you've got to understand, and actors are as well, and they're the ones kind of putting themselves on the line on the screen, really. Shawshank Redemption.
Because if you do trust her, there's no reason you can't keep that 35,000.
What did you say?
35,000.
35,000?
All of it.
All of it?
Every penny.
You better start making sense.
If you want to keep all that money, give it to your wife.
I was at the American Society of Cinematographers Clubhouse one time, and there was some of my heroes there, this obviously was years ago, talking about this film and saying, yeah, it was really well shot, but, it's much easier when you just use natural light. They didn't realize, but the whole cell block is a set.
that's built inside a warehouse. Yeah, we shot in a real prison, but only the exteriors, and the mess hall was a real prison, and some corridors. And to do that, I had to have every HMI that my gaffer Bill O'Leary could get hold of in the States, we had in Mansfield, lighting that location for daylight, because we were shooting a 12-hour day. You could maybe shoot 2 or 3 hours with natural light in some of those rooms, but you'd have to make sure it was a nice day. You don't want to over-dramatize it. I mean, the shot of Tim when he escapes and he's standing looking up the heavens with his arms out in the rain, I mean, that's as dramatic as it gets. Maybe that's a little too dramatic as well. So there was a huge amount of lighting in it, and I thought it was kind of flattering when they said they didn't feel there was any lighting involved. Sicario. Well, that was like, okay, so it's getting dark, so how are they going to see and how are we going to see? How's the audience going to see? When I read the script, I said to Denis, well, it's all very well, but if you want the audience to see anything, that's going to be a cheat. And then he said, well, what if everything is seen through their assisted vision? And I said, okay, well, I've done night vision enough. I did it in a film called Courage Under Fire, quite a lot of it. But the problem is then, how do you differentiate between the characters' points of view? And he said, yeah, it'll be all right. We need 2 different systems. My wife and I, James and I, we kind of were doing research on this and found this company called FLIR, who were doing kind of high-end infrared imagery. And they lent us a camera that we could experiment with. So you get a very different image like that from, what is basically a heat sensor, as opposed to something that is an image intensifier that is actually just taking the starlight or whatever and just pulling the hell out of it. One shot we shot during the test, which was following somebody as they were going down the steps into the tunnel. A prop guy heated up the soles of their shoes, so they're really hot. So at the beginning of the shot, they're walking, and it's like really, you see these footprints really bright. And by the time they get to the bottom of the stairs, it's faded away. I thought it was a really interesting trick. There's a shot in the film like that, but it's never held long enough that you see the footprints disappear. My favorite scene in the film probably is in the kitchen. It's just a simple two-hander between Emily and Benicio.
I need you to sign this piece of paper. It basically says that everything we did was done by the book.
Originally, that was like a few pages of dialogue. Benicio said, do we really need this? They had a long, long rehearsal time, stripping it down to the bare essentials. And I thought that was just fantastic. I really enjoyed that. At the end of all this, all the rest of the stuff that's gone on, you get to that point and it's like, okay, bah. I thought it was really good. Big Lebowski. Yeah, it was very much Joel and Ethan, their idea. I mean, we talked it through. I mean, we talk about little things about how you do the stars in the backing, which I did it all with like 3M front projection material and cut it up, stuff like that. I remember when the wardrobe was designed and they got these big kind of bowling kind of hat things around them, and it was really awkward, but actually was kind of interesting the way they worked and everything, And then you find a way of tracking down the bowling alley. And one time we used this little remote car with a camera rigged on it. But another time, Bruce Hammy, my dolly grip, said, I'll get a 30-foot pipe, we'll put the camera at the end of it, and I'll just push it down. So the shot going under the legs of the girls down there, it's just the camera on a little soft pad, and my dolly grip's got this long metal pipe, and he's just pushing it down the middle. I mean, it's really low tech, but it's kind of fun.
We commit your final mortal remains to the bosom of the Pacific Ocean, which you love so well. Good night, sweet prince.
We were standing down on the hillside down in San Pedro, and and it just happened. It was so windy, they threw the ashes out of the French roast can. French roast, which is something we talked about as being kind of funny. Anyway, the ash comes out and it disappears, which is fine, but I looked around and my assistant was completely covered in them. So was I.
Oh shit, dude, I'm sorry.
I thought I remember things like that. It was kind of funny. I kind of love all those little challenges, yeah. No Country for Old Men.
Call it. Call it, yes. For a whole lot. Just call it.
Well, we need to know what we're calling it for here.
You need to call it. I can't call it for you. Well, it wouldn't be fair.
I didn't put nothing up.
Yes, you did. You've been putting it up your whole life. You just didn't know it.
The thing about Joel and Ethan, they love getting into different kind of worlds. You know, they kind of just move around in different genres, don't they? A really interesting way. But they're very prepared, you know, spend a lot of time talking about it, doing drawings, storyboarding, studying locations. You talk about the night sequence going into the river. They were very, very specific locations, and the whole sequence is split up. The trucks are where the drug bust goes wrong is one location, and then running to the river is about a couple of miles away from that. So it was, you know, like any film, it's a sort of jigsaw is how you sort of schedule things. But it was really important for this because it wasn't a huge amount of money. It wasn't a hugely big budget film. One of the things that early on that Joel and Ethan said, when we're shooting this, just be aware we're not going to have any music on it. They knew right at the start, well before we started shooting, the only sound would be natural sounds. So that impacts like, okay, when do you have dust going through, or where do you have kind of grass so you can feel a wind and have the wind noise, and like the peanut wrapper in the gas station, you know, the packet just going. Again, everything's storyboarded in advance, even though sometimes we would change things fairly dramatically on set. My gaffer, Chris Napolitano, and I spent many nights, many days, and then nights as well, going to that town and saying where we were going to put lights and how we were going to rig street lamps and which street lamps we didn't want on because it was kind of too flat with them on, and which ones would be the key sources. You know, over, I think it was 2 weeks, they cabled the rooftops and put not a lot of lights, but little lights in very specific places. We knew if we were in the truck looking out the window, those lights had to be on. And then we wanted this shop to stay open, or we wanted to put some fluorescent tubes above the shop. You know, there's still things that happen on the day and you just find, oh, well, that light doesn't work, but I could put one here and that'll be really interesting, you know. It's partly creative and trying to get in the heads of the directors, but get in the heads of the characters as well and reflect the characters and the story going on in front of you. But it's also a technical challenge. So you sort of break it down into all the aspects that you need to deal with. And there's one shot where Tommy Lee goes back to the motel room. He's standing in the doorway and his truck is outside and his shadow's playing on the wall. And it's kind of this fractured kind of shadow, and there's a mirror with another bit of fractured light. You know, usually I don't use two lights. I have two shadows. I mean, because it's not really real, but at this point it just seemed right. And that's how you try and express something that's going on with the character and within the scene. Skyfall.
Who doesn't appreciate the occasional twist, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
When first I heard about Sam doing a Bond movie, he called me up and he said, don't put the phone down, but I'm going to do the next James Bond. And I think I probably said something, why wouldn't I put the phone down? He said, we're just going to approach it. It's just a film. It's nothing to, look at it just as a film like we've done already, Jarhead or Revolutionary Road. And it's a film. It's about a character. It's about an aging spy the world's passing him by. Can he still compete? And it's about those sort of things. We weren't making a Bond movie. That's the way I saw it. Probably most of it we shot single camera. I like to operate, so I operated. Certain sequences we had 11 cameras. You do when you have big stunts and action, but for the most part it was very controlled and very considered, and like any other movie. And if it had been multiple cameras and dozens of units, I wouldn't have taken it. But Sam said, no, we'll concentrate. It's as much a character study as it is an action movie. That's what drew me in. At one point, we discussed about the attack coming off the water. These guys in dinghies at night coming, and the forest behind the castle going on fire. But you do that on a real location. I mean, with the frozen lake is CG in the background. And when the building's on fire, we shot some of it on this location with a brilliantly controlled burn of the set. And then we recreated that in a similar way as doing the church in 1917. We recreated that on stage with a big light bank, which was replaced with elements that we'd shot of the house burning on location. The ice was fake ice. The break in the ice was helped with CG, but we shot underwater shots on a tank. But again, you know what the wish list is, and you sort of break it down into what shots you can do in, as much as possible, you do it in camera, Fargo. I think I'm drawn to desolation. Whether it's my still photographs of desolated English seaside or the American West. I'm not very good at shooting crowds. I like lonely people in big spaces, I guess. So Fargo is good for me.
You're the owner here, Mr. Lundegaard?
Nah, executive sales manager.
Well, you can help me. My name's Marge Gunderson.
My father-in-law, he's the owner.
Uh-huh. Well, I'm a police officer from up Brainerd, investigating some malfeasance. And I was just wondering if you'd had any new vehicles stolen off the lot in the past couple of weeks.
We didn't get any snow that year. That was a real frustration. One day we would shoot part of the scene in one location. During the day, the snow would melt, and then we would have to go like another 20 miles north to get another place that could match and shoot there. And we were... It was funny. Some of the parking lot shots, it's totally created snow, so the effects team would work all night snowing the airport parking lot and the one outside the main office building.
Can you even name all the movies that you worked on with the Coen brothers?
Barton Fink, Hudsucker, Fargo, Serious Man, Intolerable Cruelty, Big Lebowski. I'm losing track now. Yeah, see? No Country for Old Men. I mean... The assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, and like that. It's more like a tone poem in a way. It's a kind of memory. I don't know. If you read the book, wonderful book, the film's based on it. It's wonderful. There are a few existing photographs of Jesse James, especially one at his death in the morgue or whatever. That vignette, it's an old box camera and it's vignetting. And Andrew and I talked about it a lot. And he said, I think that would be a really interesting way to come in and out of sequences and give it a slightly strange sort of distance feel. We got feedback from certain people saying, can you shoot it with a normal lens? Because we don't know about this. We don't like it. So I think we kind of pulled back a little bit. Seeing the final cut, I remember talking to Andrew, and we both said, wish we'd have used it a little more, because there's other places it could have built the transition between sequences, and that's what it was really about.
I wanted to ask, what was in that original 4-hour cut that was unjustly trimmed down?
Well, unjustly, I'm a director. I mean, unjustly. No, I would love to. I did see the longer cut because I saw an edit. We shot a lot of what happened after the film ends. We shot what happens to Frank James, which is really interesting because he had a farm up in Maine or somewhere up there. He used to take tourists around his farm and charge them for looking at his farmhouse and stuff. It's like gangster tourism or whatever, you know what I mean? It's like, I thought that was really interesting. And just in the film, there was more things. I mean, it's all true. It's all what actually happened. And I'm a sucker for true stories that are so strange and tell you so much about that period and those characters and that life that they had. I think it's so good. I could have done with the other hour, you know. And it wouldn't have made any more money or lost any more money. So why the hell, you know? Empire of Light. The film, for me, when I first read the script, was very much about a small world, a character who's lonely, but she gets solace and comfort from the friends around her. And most of her friends and most of the people she sees every day are in the cinema. The people that she works with in the cinema, the people that support her, they know her problem and they support her. So for me, the film's about community. It's not about the wonders of movie making, all that rubbish. It's really about this one woman's world, and felt much more of a film that needed to be quiet and sort of observational in a way. And the camera was just kind of observing and allowing the characters to be within the frame.
So when do we, open up?
20 minutes?
What's up there?
Our public art allowed.
Can I have a look?
Oh, I'm not sure.
Go on, please.
The film required a upstairs abandoned ballroom in an abandoned part of the cinema, and that's what Dreamland provided. So we were lucky to find that, really. It was strange because the lobby at Dreamland is kind of very small, and it's got a low ceiling, and it's got no staircase or anything, and the script required something a little bit more. You enter this space and there it is, a lobby and a staircase and the cinema's going off. So the solution we had was actually building a set on a space facing the promenade to marry it with what would be the view out of the location. I used a lot of LEDs. Obviously daylight changes, and a lot of the action takes place inside and outside the lobby, but it's actually open to the environment. So I needed some way of being able to control the light level on the inside against the outside, not only in terms of intensity, but also color balance, because at the end of the day, light's getting bluer and all the rest of it. And the other reason was you build them into a set like that, and if you use it, traditional tungsten lights, they get incredibly hot. And that would have been kind of crazy, especially with us shooting in the winter, the glass doors, hot inside, cold outside. That's recipe for a lot of badness. Blade Runner 2049.
Got her name?
Officer KD6-3.
That's not a name. It's a serial number.
All right. Joe.
What do you want, Joe?
I love sci-fi. One of my favorite films is Tarkovsky's Solaris, but I like that kind of sci-fi. I like something that feels kind of real. I don't like science fantasy. But, the approach is different, the kind of color scheme of Blade Runner, the kind of world you're creating. And, if we hold this shot, it's again like Andrei Tarkovsky or Melville or whoever, or Bresson. If we hold this shot a bit longer, maybe it'll mean something else. Maybe the audience go, why are we holding this shot? What's going to happen? You build a tension through the use of the shot, the frame, and just little camera movements. Denis a master of that. I mean, again, it's all started really with conversations we had in pre-production. And a lot of things just develop. They start as little things and then develop, and then you find how we're going to do it technically. The sequence of the holograms with the Elvis singing, and it's like a futuristic Las Vegas. Maybe it's not futurist. I haven't been to Vegas for a while. Maybe it's like that now. And the idea, it's all kind of gone wrong. So it's kind of this confusion of different people and different ideas. But you figure out how you're going to do it. One of the big things that's about that was actually, well, how are we going to shoot it? We want this big space, but we can't afford the set. So I said, well, just do it in black. And I said, we just put black drapes up around. Couldn't have been cheaper. So we figured out I figured out
okay, I did, yeah. I figured out this whole rock and roll kind of lighting scheme. I did it with a company in Budapest who actually do rock and roll, and they had these lights, and we worked together and programmed it all in. So we had this whole sequence of lighting, different lighting that goes with the different characters that appear on stage, and Elvis had it on spot. So it's a technical challenge. I'd never done it before in such a complicated way. It was great. It was great fun doing it, yeah.